The camera glides slowly over a quiet valley at dawn. Rows of apricot trees stretch in perfect formation, their pale blossoms catching the first light, while in the distance, the low hills of the Santa Cruz Mountains stand like silent sentinels. This is the Santa Clara Valley in the spring of 1946. To anyone driving Highway 101, it still looks like farmland, a place where Italian and Portuguese families have coaxed fruit from the soil for 3 generations. Yet within the lifetime of a single child playing among those trees, this same ground will become the most expensive real estate on Earth. Its orchards replaced by windowless buildings that consume more electricity than entire African nations, and store more secrets than the Vatican ever did. The transformation will be described as a miracle of private ingenuity, the triumph of the garage tinkerer, and the college dropout. That story is comforting, familiar, and almost entirely untrue. The real architects never wore hoodies. They wore dark suits, carried top-secret clearances, and answered to offices that officially did not exist. The true beginning lies 2,000 miles east, in a smoke-filled room in Washington, D.C., in the autumn of 1945. The Second World War has ended only weeks earlier, and the men gathered around the table have spent the last 4 years mastering the art of total information war. They are the survivors of the Office of Strategic Services and the Signals Intelligence Service, the quiet geniuses who broke the Japanese Purple Code and the German Enigma, the ones who knew where every U-boat prowled and every panzer division slept. Their names are rarely spoken in public: William Friedman, Frank Rowlett, Prescott Currier, Joseph Wenger. But they have seen what happens when one side possesses perfect knowledge and the other is blind. Now they stare at a new map, one dominated by a red stain that stretches from the Elbe to the Pacific, and they understand with cold certainty that the next enemy will be infinitely harder to read. The Soviet Union has sealed its borders, shot its own spies for talking too much, and wrapped its intentions in 7 layers of deception. Human agents will never be enough again. So they make a decision that will echo for a century. They decide that the United States must build machines capable of listening to the entire electromagnetic spectrum, machines that can think faster than any human, machines that can see from the edge of space and never blink. The private sector has neither the money nor the motive to create such things. IBM is still perfecting electric typewriters. Bell Labs is brilliant but cautious. The great industrial giants are busy converting tank factories back to automobile assembly lines. Congress, exhausted by war spending, will never approve open funding for weapons that sound like science fiction. The only solution is to fund the future in secret through front companies, university grants, and a network of trusts so opaque that even the president will not know the full picture. The first move is almost invisible. In 1946, the Army Security Agency quietly establishes the Electronics Research Command at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and begins pouring classified money into something called electronic digital computing. At the same time, the Navy sets up its own computing laboratory at Dahlgren, Virginia, and the newly formed Air Force begins funding Project MX-796 at North American Aviation for high-altitude reconnaissance. None of these programs appear in the federal budget under their real names. They are buried inside innocuous line items labeled miscellaneous research or engineering services. By 1947, the Central Intelligence Agency has been created by the National Security Act, and its first covert action is not a coup in some distant country, but the systematic capture of America's scientific future. Stanford University becomes one of the first great beneficiaries. In 1946, the university is still a respectable but second-tier institution overshadowed by Berkeley and the Ivy League. Its Dean of Engineering, Frederick Terman, has just returned from wartime service directing the Radio Research Laboratory at Harvard, where he learned how desperately the military needs advanced electronics. Terman makes a simple offer to the Office of Naval Research and the newly formed Air Force Research Directorate. Give us money, and we will build you the scientists you need. The deal is accepted with enthusiasm. Between 1946 and 1955, Stanford receives more than $20 million in classified contracts, hundreds of millions in today's money. Almost all of it routed through front organizations with names like the Applied Electronics Laboratory. The money buys vacuum tubes, oscilloscopes, and the brightest young minds the draft has spared. It also buys silence. Graduate students working on classified projects are forbidden from publishing their theses. The results are stamped secret and shipped east in locked pouches. Across the country, the same pattern repeats. MIT receives a river of money to build the Whirlwind computer, originally designed to train bomber pilots in real time. The Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton hosts John von Neumann as he perfects the architecture that still governs every computer on Earth, quietly funded by the Atomic Energy Commission and the Army. The University of Pennsylvania's Moore School of Electrical Engineering delivers ENIAC in 1946 and immediately begins work on its successor under Army contract. Every breakthrough is dual use by design. A machine that can calculate artillery tables in seconds can also predict the yield of a hydrogen bomb, and a network that can route messages around battlefield damage can survive nuclear war. By the early 1950s, the scale of the investment is staggering. The SAGE air defense system alone, designed to track Soviet bombers in real time, costs more than the Manhattan Project in inflation-adjusted dollars. It requires 24 direction centers, each the size of a city block, linked by dedicated telephone lines, and powered by custom-built computers weighing 30 tons apiece. The prime contractor is IBM, which learns more about large-scale computing in 5 years than it had in the previous 50. When SAGE is finally decommissioned in the 1980s, its technology has already seeded the airline reservation systems, the banking networks, and the first corporate data centers that will one day become the cloud. Yet the crown jewel of this hidden industrial policy is born in 1958, when the shock of Sputnik forces President Eisenhower to create the Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA, inside the Pentagon. Its mandate is simple and terrifying. Make sure nothing like Sputnik ever happens again. Its budget is effectively unlimited, its oversight minimal, and its director reports only to the Secretary of Defense. ARPA becomes the greatest patron of radical ideas in human history, funding everything from material science to behavioral psychology, but its deepest obsession is information. J.C.R. Licklider, a soft-spoken psychologist from MIT, arrives in 1962 with a memo titled Man-Computer Symbiosis. He argues that the future belongs not to faster calculators, but to machines that amplify human intellect. ARPA gives him a budget and a free hand. Licklider's protege, Bob Taylor, takes the idea further. In a small office on the Pentagon's D-Ring, he funds a handful of researchers at universities across the country to build something no one has quite imagined. A network of networks that can connect different computers running different software in different locations and keep working G. Even if half the country is burning. The first 4 nodes come online in December 1969. UCLA, Stanford Research Institute, UC Santa Barbara, and the University of Utah. All 4 institutions have been living on classified money for years. The engineers call their creation ARPANET. They do not yet call it the Internet, because the word does not exist, but the architecture they invent, packet switching, distributed control, no single point of failure, is the same one that still carries every email, every video, every financial transaction on Earth. And still, almost no one outside the defense establishment knows any of this is happening. By the time the first ARPANET message stutters from UCLA to Stanford Research Institute in October 1969, just the letters LO before the system crashes, the quiet valley south of San Francisco has already begun to change. The apricot orchards are still there, But now strange new buildings rise among them. Low, concrete structures with no windows and air conditioning units the size of boxcars. Everyone knows they belong to Lockheed or Sylvania or some other defense contractor, and everyone knows better than to ask what happens inside. The classified contracts have created an ecosystem unlike any other in America. Engineers who once built guidance systems for Polaris missiles now tinker with tiny fragments of silicon in clean rooms paid for by the CIA. The work is secret, the pay is excellent, and the valley begins to attract a very particular kind of mind. Restless, brilliant, and comfortable with the knowledge that what they are building may never be acknowledged in their lifetime. The man who understands the long game better than anyone is William Shockley. In 1956, the co-inventor of the transistor leaves Bell Labs in a storm of resentment and plants his new company, Shockley Semiconductor, directly in the middle of the fruit orchards, right next to a prune drying yard. Shockley is difficult, paranoid, and convinced he is building the future, and within 18 months, 8 of his best engineers, the traitorous 8, walked out to form Fairchild Semiconductor with $1.4 million from Sherman Fairchild, an Eastern industrialist whose fortune was quietly underwritten by defense contracts. Fairchild becomes the mother church of Silicon Valley. Almost every important chip company of the next 50 years, Intel, AMD, National Semiconductor, will trace its lineage back to this single act of rebellion funded by military money. The integrated circuit, the device that makes modern computing possible, is born in a laboratory whose real customer is the Minuteman missile program. While the chip makers multiply, another quiet revolution is taking place on the Stanford campus itself. In 1968, a soft-spoken engineer named Douglas S. Engelbart stands before a stunned audience in San Francisco and demonstrates something the world has never seen: a wooden box with wheels, a screen that shows moving text, windows that overlap, and a pointer controlled by the hand. He calls it the online system, NLS, and every element of the modern personal computer is there in embryonic form. The money behind the demonstration comes from ARPA, NASA, and the Office of Naval Research. Engelbart's lab is literally down the hall from the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, which is funded by the same agencies to build machines that can understand human language and guide bombers to their targets. When journalists later ask where the personal computer revolution began, they point to Apple and Microsoft. They almost never mention that the first working model was paid for by the Department of Defense. The 1970s are the hinge decade. The Vietnam War is ending, defense budgets are shrinking, and for the first time, the architects in Washington face a genuine crisis. How to keep the technological edge when the political will to pay for it is evaporating. The solution is elegant and permanent. They begin the deliberate civilianization of military technology. In 1972, the ARPANET opens its first international links to Britain and Norway, both NATO allies with their own intelligence agencies. In 1973, the GPS constellation, originally the Navy's transit system, starts launching satellites that will eventually guide both nuclear submarines and civilian airliners. In 1995, the Altair 8800 appears on the cover of Popular Electronics, sparking the personal computer hobbyist movement, but the microprocessor inside it is a direct descendant of chips designed for the Maverick missile. The Valley's engineers do not see this as corruption. They see it as evolution. The same circuits that once guided weapons can now play Pong. The pivot accelerates under Jimmy Carter, and then Ronald Reagan. In 1978, the Pentagon quietly declassifies packet switching technology and hands the expanding ARPANET to the National Science Foundation, which begins connecting universities across the country. In 1983, Reagan announces the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, a program so ambitious that it forces every defense contractor in California to master parallel computing, fiber optics, and real-time imaging. The official story is missile defense. The real effect is to underwrite an entire generation of supercomputing startups. When the Soviet Union finally collapses in 1991, the United States does not just win the Cold War. It wins the technological peace because almost every tool the Soviets spent themselves bankrupt trying to match has already been seeded into the civilian economy, waiting to be monetized. And then, in the spring of 1999, the mask finally comes off. The Central Intelligence Agency announces the creation of In-Q-Tel, a venture capital fund with a bland name and a chilling mission, to ensure that the CIA never again falls behind the commercial technology curve. The fund is structured as a non-profit, headquartered just minutes from Langley, and its first president is Gilman Louie, a former video game entrepreneur who understands both classified systems and consumer markets. Congress is told that In-Q-Tel will simply scout promising startups. The truth is far more deliberate. The agency has studied the Valley for 50 years and learned exactly how innovation actually works. It needs risk capital, technical guidance, and, most important, guaranteed customers. In-Q-Tel will provide all three, and in return, it will make sure the most powerful tools never leave American control. The first investment is symbolic and perfect. In 1999, In-Q-Tel writes a $5 million check to a small company in Mountain View called Keyhole, whose software can stitch together satellite and aerial images into a seamless, zoomable view of the Earth. The technology was originally developed for intelligence analysts who needed to study missile sites in near real time. 5 years later, Google buys Keyhole for an undisclosed sum and turns it into Google Earth. Overnight, every desktop on the planet gains ACC-ES to imagery that was once restricted to analysts with TS/SCI clearances. The public celebrates the democratization of knowledge. The agency celebrates the democratization of collection. The attacks of September 11th, 2001, arrive like a detonation inside an already primed system. Within hours, the machinery that has been quietly assembling itself for half a century shifts into open acceleration. Congress passes the Patriot Act in 45 days, a document thicker than a phone book that no one has time to read, and buried inside it is the legal framework for everything that follows. Intelligence budgets triple overnight. The phrase total information awareness stops being a research propost cell and becomes policy. Silicon Valley, still limping from the dot-com crash, discovers the one customer who will never run out of money and will never ask for a working product before paying. The Valley does not sell its soul in 2001. It simply cashes the check it has been waiting to receive since 1946. The partnerships form with breathtaking speed. In the weeks after the towers fall, the NSA approaches every major telecom carrier with a simple request: let us copy everything. AT&T opens its splitting rooms in San Francisco and hands over the fire hose of domestic internet traffic. Verizon, Quest, and Bell South follow. The rooms are given innocuous names: SG3 Secure Room, Study Group 3, and staffed by agency-cleared engineers who work alongside carrier employees as if they have always belonged there. By 2003, the program has a code name, Stellar Wind, and a scale no one outside the innermost circle fully grasps. Every phone call, every email, every packet that crosses an American backbone is duplicated and stored. The companies receive letters of indemnification signed by the Attorney General. They also receive hundreds of millions of dollars a year in compensation. Cooperation is not voluntary. It is simply the path of least resistance. Meanwhile, the consumer internet is exploding, and the explosion is being guided by hands that never appear on any org chart. Google, still a young company in 2001, wins its first intelligence contract in 2003 to provide custom search appliances to the National Security Agency. The appliances are physically shipped to Fort Meade in locked cases. No remote access is permitted, but the relationship deepens quickly. By 2004, Google engineers are working inside a skiff in Virginia to build a classified version of their crawler, capable of indexing both the open web and the agency's internal repositories. The project is kept so secret that most Google employees never learn of it. Years later, when journalists ask how Google grew so dominant so fast, the official story is superior algorithms and clean design. The quieter truth is that the artist engineering problems, scaling to billions of pages, handling real-time updates, resisting nation-state attacks, were first solved for a customer who could not tolerate failure. Facebook follows a similar arc, though its trajectory is more personal than institutional. In 2004, a Harvard sophomore named Mark Zuckerberg launches the Facebook from his dorm room, helped along by seed money from Peter Thiel, a Stanford-educated libertarian whose PayPal windfall is still fresh. What few notice at the time is that Thiel's business partner, a man named Reid Hoffman, has been advising In-Q-Tel almost since its founding, and that the law firm that incorporates Facebook, Cooley Godward, has deep intelligence community ties. By 2008, the company is growing so fast that it needs capital and expertise beyond traditional venture firms. The solution arrives in the form of a $40 million investment from Greylock Partners, whose senior partner Howard Cox has sat on In-Q-Tel's board since 2001. The investment is small by later standards, but it brings something far more valuable than money. Credibility with agencies that are beginning to realize social networks are the most efficient surveillance platforms ever invented by accident. Amazon's transformation is the most dramatic of all. In 2006, the company is still primarily an online bookseller bleeding cash, when a small division called Amazon Web Services launches a primitive cloud offering built on spare capacity from its own retail operations. The first serious customer is not a startup, but the Central Intelligence Agency. In 2013, after a multi-year bake-off against IBM, Amazon signs a $600 million contract to build a private cloud region exclusively for the intelligence community. The contract is classified, but its effects are not. Thousands of CIA engineers suddenly need to learn how to write software for Amazon's architecture. Amazon's engineers suddenly have access to requirements no commercial customer could ever impose. Absolute isolation, end-to-end encryption, audit trails that survive nation-state compromise. The region, codenamed C2S, becomes the most secure computing environment on Earth, and every lesson learned is immediately productized for the public cloud. Within 5 years, AWS is profitable for the first time in Amazon's history. And within 10, it is the profit engine that subsidizes free shipping for tens of millions of consumers. Palantir represents the purest distillation of the post-9/11 fusion. Founded in 2003 by Peter Thiel and Alex Karp with early In-Q-Tel funding, the company's stated mission is to help human analysts make sense of massive datasets. Exactly the problem the intelligence community has faced since the underwear bomber nearly brought down a plane with explosives sewn into his clothes. Palantir's first contract is with the CIA's venture arm, its second with the NSA, its third with the FBI. By 2009, its software is being used to track IED networks in Iraq and Afghanistan, fusing satellite imagery, drone video, cell phone intercepts, and human intelligence into a single God's eye view. The company refuses almost all commercial business for years because its real customer pays in advance and never cancels. When it finally goes public in 2020, its filing reads like a defense contractor's prospectus wrapped in a hoodie. Half the revenue still comes from government contracts, and the largest shareholder remains the founder, who once wrote that democracy and freedom may be incompatible. The system that emerges is not a conspiracy in the Hollywood sense. It is an ecosystem, self-reinforcing and voracious. Agencies provide the requirements no civilian market would tolerate. Companies build solutions at a scale no civilian market could afford. The solutions are then hardened against the most sophisticated adversaries on Earth, Russia, China, and eventually each other. and sold back to consumers as convenience. Every iPhone location point, every Google search query, every Alexa request becomes dual-use data. Raw material for an advertisement and raw material for an analyst. The marginal cost of collecting one more user approaches zero, while the strategic value compounds exponentially. By 2013, the arrangement is so complete that when a young contractor named Edward Snowden walks out of an NSA facility in Hawaii with a thumb drive full of secrets, the revelations feel less like exposure and more like confirmation. PRISM slides show logos everyone recognizes. Microsoft since 2007, Yahoo 2008, Google and Facebook 2009, Apple 2012, lined up in neat chronological order. The companies issue denials crafted by the same law firms that wrote their immunity agreements. The public is outraged for a news cycle, then returns to posting vacation photos. The machine has become too convenient to refuse, and too embedded to dismantle. By the second decade of the NU century, the Orchard Valley is gone entirely, replaced by a landscape that feels more like a fortified nation than a suburb. Endless rows of low, windowless buildings stretch along highways whose names still remember the fruit they buried. De Anza Boulevard, Prune Ridge Avenue, Orchard Parkway. The buildings carry bland corporate logos, but their power draw rivals small countries, and their perimeters are patrolled by private security with clearances higher than most generals. Inside, air thick with refrigerated cold hums across server racks that store the intimate details of 4 billion human lives. The electricity comes from dams on the Colorado River and gas plants in the Central Valley. And the water to cool it all is piped from aquifers that farmers can no longer afford to tap. No one planned this exact geography, yet every acre of it was purchased, permitted, and protected by decisions made in classified rooms long before anyone outside those rooms had ever heard of social media. The companies themselves have become something new in history. Private superpowers that exercise sovereign authority without democratic accountability. Apple can track a dissident across international borders more effectively than most intelligence services. Google can alter the information diet of entire populations with a tweak to an algorithm no regulator is allowed to read. Amazon can shut some to own an entire website, Parler, WikiLeaks, or tomorrow someone else, with the same casual authority once reserved for nation-states seizing printing presses. Meta owns the largest identity database ever assembled, complete with real names, family ties, political leanings, sexual preferences, and real-time location. And every one of these capabilities was either directly funded or indirectly enabled by the same agencies whose mission statements still promise to protect American citizens from foreign threats. The revolving door has become so smooth that it no longer feels like a door at all. In 2018, the former director of the National Security Agency, General Keith Alexander, starts a consultant firm whose only product is helping Wall Street apply NSA surveillance techniques to high-frequency trading. In 2020, the former director of the CIA, David Petraeus, joins the board of a data analytics company that began life inside In-Q-Tel. Regina Dugan leaves her position as head of DARPA to run Google's Advanced Technology and Projects Group, then leaves Google to run Facebook's even more secretive Building 8. The movement is so constant that industry conferences now feature panels titled From Langley to Sand Hill, delivered without irony. The knowledge transfer is perfect. The agencies teach the companies how to scale surveillance, and the companies teach the agencies how to make surveillance invisible. The economic logic has hardened into something close to physical law. Surveillance is the only resource that increases in value with use. Every additional user generates more data, which trains better models, which attract more users, which generate more data. The network effects are total. Google processes 92% of the world's search queries, not because it is loved, but because no competitor can match the training data created by those 92%. Facebook's family of apps reaches 3.8 billion people, not because of superior design, but because no rival can replicate a social graph built from 15 years of mandatory real name policy. Amazon's cloud hosts 42% of the public internet, because no other provider has 15 years of experience running the CIA's most sensitive workloads. The moats are not financial, they are informational, and they were dug with taxpayer money long before consumers were asked to pay. China's arrival as a rival merely perfects the model. For decades, American agencies worried about technology leaking eastward. Now, they worry about an entire parallel ecosystem rising beyond their reach. The response is not to restrict the technology, but to bind it closer. Export controls are written with deliberate loopholes large enough for the major platforms to continue operating globally, while smaller competitors suffocate. TikTok is demonized, while American services collect orders of magnitude more intimate data with less transparency. Huawei is banned, while American chips continue to power China's own surveillance state through third country sales. The goal has never been privacy. It has been control of the stack. As long as the foundational layers, the chips, the cloud regions, the undersea cables, the app stores, remain American, the strategic victory won in 1946 remains intact. And the public, exhausted by complexity and addicted to convenience, signs the terms of service without reading them. Each new scandal, Cambridge Analytica, Clearview AI, NSO Group, the latest mass breach, P reduces a brief flare of anger, followed by a collective shrug. The services are too deeply embedded in daily life to abandon. Your photos are in iCloud. Your friends are on Instagram. Your calendar is in Google. Your money is in Venmo. Your medical records are in Epic systems running on AWS. To leave is not merely inconvenient. It is social and professional suicide. The machine has achieved what every intelligence service in history only dreamed of. A panopticon that people beg to be locked inside. The architects, now old men giving commencement addresses at the universities they once funded in secret, watch the final phase with satisfaction. They do not need to issue orders anymore. The companies issue the orders themselves, wrapped in the language of shareholder value and user safety. Content moderation at scale is indistinguishable from censorship at scale. Location tracking for ads is indistinguishable from location tracking for targeting. Behavioral prediction for recommendation is indistinguishable from behavioral prediction for pre-crime. The tools built to defeat the Soviet Union have become the tools that govern the peace, and the peace has begun to look uncannily like permanent, frictionless dominion. In the end, the Orchard Valley was never conquered by entrepreneurs. It was cultivated, patiently, expensively, ruthlessly, over 3 generations of classified budgets and quiet handshakes. The fruit it bears now is not apricots, but power, pure, granular, predictive, and absolute. And the men who planted the first trees understood something we still struggle to accept. Once information becomes the most valuable commodity on Earth, whoever controls the richest sources of information controls everything else. They made sure that would always be them.